I've worked with a number of people that I have absolutely loved as human beings, but I haven't trusted that they actually were going to carry out the safeguarding actions that they were responsible for. And I couldn't continue to work with them in the way that I had before, because even though I respected them as a human being, I didn't trust that they were going to carry out what they said they were going to do. And actually, Jess Phillips this week has provided me with some brilliant material for this speech, because she said exactly the same in her resignation talk, in her resignation letter to Keir Starmer this week. So those of you, I'm sure you know who Jess Phillips is, but Jess Phillips is the safeguarding minister, or was the safeguarding minister. And when I read her resignation letter, I thought to myself, I could have written that letter a number of times, and I know I have colleagues that could have written that letter as well. We've worked with people that we really, really love as a human being, but when it came to them having to actually take some actions, they failed. They couldn't follow through on what they said they were going to do. So I would rather, like Jess says, I would rather work with somebody that I may not necessarily get along with professionally, but I trust that they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And so when I read her resignation letter, and if you haven't read it in full, I would suggest that you do, she absolutely reflects how I feel about safeguarding and how I feel about my relationships with people within the safeguarding world. So what we need to think about is that those policies are not the things that create trust. Policies don't heal the wounds. Policies don't prevent harm. People do. Culture does, and your daily choices do. And I think that's what Jess was trying to say in her resignation letter. So today we're going to explore how religious orders can move safeguarding from something that's written on paper to something lived in practice. I want to talk about what leaders, communities, and volunteers can do, practically, spiritually, and relationally, to make safeguarding part of the very DNA of religious life. So let's begin again with that simple truth. Safeguarding is not a document, it is behaviour. Policies are essential, but safeguarding rooted in gospel values asks for more. It asks for a culture, a way of being that is instinctive, relational, and shared. Culture is shaped by how we speak about safeguarding when no one is watching, how we respond to concerns that feel uncomfortable or inconvenient, how we welcome questions, scrutiny, and challenge, how we hold ourselves and one another accountable with kindness and clarity. Culture is not created by one person, it's created by all of us. And it's strengthened every time someone chooses transparency over defensiveness, learning over fear. And so we're going to start with leaders. So leaders set the tone. Leadership is the single most powerful driver of cultural change. Not because leaders have authority, because they do, but because leaders set the emotional climate of an organisation. And I was lucky enough again to be listening to a radio programme, and Sarah Davis, the entrepreneur, was talking, and she'd done a lot of work around this area, and she was saying that she spoke to her, I think it was her brother-in-law, and she said to him, what is it that when you walk into an organisation or you walk into a room, how do you know if the leader has set the culture correctly? And he said to her, the tea rota. And she said, what do you mean, the tea rota? So he said, I look to see if the CEO of that company has his name or her name on the tea rota. And he said, if they're prepared to get up and make tea for everybody in that organisation, then I know, without looking at anything else, that they are going to set the cultural tone of that organisation. And I thought that was brilliant. I just thought that really stands out and just tells us everything we need to know. And it leads into the next sentence, and this is what I'm going to come back to quite a lot with leaders. People watch what leaders do far more than what they say. Okay, and that again I think is reflected in Jess Phillips' resignation letter. And again, I would say I think exactly the same. I've come across some amazing leaders, and some of those are the ones that pick me up at the train station when I need it. They're the ones that send me a quick email to say, how are your family? Because I've probably told them something ridiculous that's going on at home. And they're the ones that take me on a tour around the local area when I've said, oh, I've never been here before. And they said, oh, get in the car and we'll come and have a look. And so they're the kind of leaders that I know are prepared to just do something to make people feel comfortable and at home. So if leaders are open about safeguarding and open about challenges, open about learning and open about mistakes, then others feel safe to do the same. Now, I'm not going to dwell on very many negatives today because I think it's a really lovely opportunity for us to get together to think about all the preventative things we can do in safeguarding. But there is one incident that happened in my training career at the RLSS, and it really brought this home to me as well. I was holding a training session, and it was for leaders, and there was a person on the call, and we'd got into the training session, we'd got it started, and we started to talk about adult safeguarding. And we actually started to talk about adult safeguarding because before the training I'd actually sent some emails out to say, can you please let me know, is there anything in particular that you'd like me to cover during the training? And I'd had a lot of feedback saying, actually, I think we really need to start talking about adult safeguarding. So that's what we did. We started the session and we started to talk about adult safeguarding. And one of the attendees obviously put their hand up to speak, and when they spoke, they were quite vociferous and actually quite aggressively saying adult safeguarding doesn't exist. We don't need to talk about adult safeguarding. Adults are adults, they can look after themselves. They don't need this. We should be looking after children and young people, which I understand, but we all know that as adults, any one of us at any point in time can be vulnerable, and we do need to look after each other. Now, that person really didn't want to let this go, and it came into a bit of a battle between me and the person, and me trying to remain professional and keep everybody in the call calm. And I kept thinking to myself, why isn't anybody saying anything? Why aren't any of the other people who asked me to talk about safeguarding helping me out here? So I had to just keep going over my knowledge of safeguarding, my knowledge of adult safeguarding. And it got to the point where the person did stop talking. But it absolutely ruined the whole session. I think we'd probably got an hour and a half left, and you could just feel that everybody just wanted to leave. So that leader, because of their powerful voice and their ability to put across their point of view without being prepared to listen to anybody else, had completely set the tone for that training session. And we got through it, and people just didn't really want to participate. And it really left me thinking, yeah, that's a leader who has influence. The other people on the call weren't part of their order, but the other people on the call knew who this person was and were not prepared to challenge. And when I came off that call, I was, admittedly, I was really upset. And then I got lots of emails coming in from all of the other people on the call saying, well done, you did really well. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But it just made me realise that they didn't have the strength, or, they didn't feel empowered to stand up to the person that had the loudest voice in the room. So that's what I mean about how a leader can really set the tone very, very quickly. Okay, and so, it leads into this part that transparency is not a weakness, it's a strength, and it's integrity, and it's the antidote to secrecy. So I'd wish that all the other people on that call had actually said, we do need to talk about this, we're not getting this right, and perhaps then, the conversation would have been much, much more different. Okay, so let's go through and see what we think, or what I think, perhaps people need to do that are in a leadership position. So transparency. Safeguarding can't be something that leaders get to when time allows. It must be a standing agenda, it must be part of formation, it must be part of recruitment, it must be part of supervision, and it must be part of governance. If safeguarding is always squeezed into the last 5 minutes of a meeting, the message is really clear. It's not important. And I've sat on voluntary committees as the safeguarding trustee, for example, and I've seen that happen so many times. I've been there ready with my presentation and it's just fallen off the end of the agenda. So it's not good enough for it just to be there. It has to actually have attention paid to it. Actually, I think I'm on this one. Ooh. Right, so leaders must also invest in training. Well, of course I'm going to say that. And I've got a lot of people in the room who probably agree with me. But a culture of safeguarding does require skill and not just goodwill. So leaders need to understand what good practice looks like, how to respond to concerns, how to create psychologically safe environments. Do you think that leader created a psychologically safe environment within that training session? They absolutely didn't. How to support those who report harm, how to challenge poor behaviour, how to manage allegations, and how to hold those boundaries with compassion, because we know there are those boundaries, but they have to be held in the right way. Training's not a tick box, it is formation, it's leadership development, and it's a stewardship of trust. I think for me this is probably the most important one. Leaders must embody humility. So again, did that person in that training session embody any form of humility whatsoever? And what was that? What must that then be like throughout the order that they worked with? Safeguarding asks leaders to do something countercultural. Of course it does. It means they have to admit that they don't know everything, and that's really hard. That's a really difficult thing to do. But humility is not the same as self-doubt. It's the willingness to learn, and it's the willingness to be accountable, and it's the willingness to be challenged. So, leaders must create a culture where speaking up is safe. So notwithstanding all the barriers we speak about so often, people will only raise concerns if they believe 3 fundamental things. And the first one is that they will be listened to. And so often we hear that. All I wanted was to be listened to. And that they will be taken seriously, and they will not be punished for speaking, because again, we know historically that that's happened as well. And so leaders must make those 3 things really visible and consistent and unquestionable, so that the response will always be the same: being listened to, taken seriously, and not punished for speaking out. Silence is the enemy of safeguarding, and fear is the enemy of truth. And that's why we need that leadership to actually help us feed into this aspect of safeguarding.